Well, guys, last day before break. I was gonna hear a big yay. Didn't happen. Well, I'm trying. I think we'll cut it a little short today. Whoa, got another participant. Okay. Okay. Happy Holy.
Thank you so much, sir. Happy Holi to you too.
All right. So, Impressionism. Want to kind of retrace some of the things that I've been talking about lately, and something I talked about
Mr.
a lot.
Bohak. Mr. Bohak,
Yes.
are you coming for the Holi celebration on Friday?
What time is it?
It's from 1 to 4 p.m.
1 to 4. Yeah, I think I can make that. I got a dinner engagement later on, but yeah.
You can come for a few minutes or hour or so.
Yeah, of course. And are your classmates invited too?
Yes, everyone can come.
All right, good. You see the smiles here? Oh, you should be here. But yeah, thank you. Thank you, and I'll see you on Friday in person.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What I was talking about last time were those rebellious artists, those rogues, those ones that were challenging the established order. And again, another person, it could be Austin or it could be Victor. Let's see. It's not Austin, it's Victor. How'd I know that? Okay. Third time's a charm. I was talking about, excuse me, rogue artists, those that were rebelling against the salon. And we kind of got all the way up to people like Manet and those people like Gustave Courbet, the Stonebreakers, the Funeral at Arles, you know, all of this stuff. There's an echo, there's people living in the walls here, I swear. Anyway, so that being said, this is when it all really kind of comes to fruition. You know, there had been a lot of discontent among the artistic community about the power of the salon and the dictates of the salon, which really tried to push everybody into a more neoclassical kind of style. And this is the map. And guess what? This is why we have the inset here, because it's all around Paris that we're mostly going to be talking about here. We'll see some activity down here in Provence, but at any rate, if you're going to be a rebel, it's good to be a rebel at the center of the activity, where you can directly challenge what was going on. And as I was saying earlier, Paris was pretty much the accepted art capital of the Western world. It's where everything was happening. And there is a book, Austin. There is a book written by a guy named McCullough. And he was a historian, wrote an epic book on Harry Truman. And he wrote a book about late 19th century France. And this book describes not only was Paris the center of artistic activity, the leading edge, the people that were really inventing and doing all of the cutting edge, by the way, this is where we get the term avant-garde, which means the leading edge, the people in front, the cutting edge, the avant-garde. This is where it happens in France in the late 19th century. But I was talking about McCullough, noted historian, and he talked about not only was Paris the center of artistic activity, it was the center of many different disciplines. Most of the major philosophers of the time were in Paris. A lot of the medicine, the advances in medicine, for example, here we see in France. We'll talk about people like Louis Pasteur. There's so much going on. It's really kind of the epicenter of Western culture. And so anyway, these guys, this guy, Manet, we saw him already. He was the one that did the Olympia that looks like the Titian's Venus of Urbino. And he had a long career, and this is him in 1874. And he's painting a picture of one of his contemporaries, fellow artist, Claude Monet, in his studio boat. And so you can see, as I was talking about, we saw this with some of the other artists. I showed you John Singer Sargent splashing that paint around. We saw Daumier, and we saw how exactly Daumier put that painting together, which included the grid lines that he used to draw this. And so we're seeing a lot of that. They're really putting out for public inspection the process, the method that they use to paint the painting. So what else is happening? Technology, France, 19th century. Daguerre invents photography. And so photography is, by this time, is really pretty well established and pretty well accepted as the preferred means to make images, to make pictures, if you will. Now, this was a big thing, and especially to these avant-garde artists. Because what's happening here is that when you have photography and it's refined to a point where it's actually useful as a scientific tool. I showed you Edward Muybridge, the galloping horse, and you could, with a camera, somebody that knew how to use it, take pictures of a galloping horse and prove that at some point in the gallop, all four legs are off the ground. But you see, that's part of the story. The other part of the story is that photography is replacing painting as the standard for truthfulness, veracity, verisimilitude. Painting is kind of secondary here. We got this new technology, and although photography is established as a process, it also takes the place of painting as being the recorder of truth. And of course it does. We would know that today. We would know that there is an artistic interpretation. We know that now. couple of hundred years ago, that wasn't quite so well accepted. Before photography, I thought there was a great deal of truth in painting. And if you could see it, you could believe it. And there was a lot of mythology, a lot of common knowledge of the culture before photography. And there was this idea that if say we're painting Christ or angels, Christ in heaven with angels, it had to be true. There was an artist that could paint that. And artists were kind of looked upon as maybe even somehow having some divine insight. How could this artist paint Jesus if they didn't somewhere in their consciousness connect with Jesus, the angels, the saints and stuff? So there was a lot of mythology kind of built around painting and designed to support the truthfulness of art. But I showed you Gustave Courbet, showed you a little film too about him. And one of his famous quotes is, "Show me an angel and I will paint it." He's destroying all of this mythology, all of this common knowledge around art. They say, I want to paint what I see. That's all I can do. I'm not pulling from my imagination. I am pulling from reality. That's what drives me. And that's realism, 19th century French realism. But we move on about 20, 30 years later, and we start to see these artists actually assert the paint. You can see it, all this choppy brushwork. It's pretty easy to see how Manet put this together, and some of this stuff is actually kind of, may I say, nondescript. Doesn't have all of the detail in it, just enough here to know that this is a woman that's in the houseboat with Claude Monet. Monet is painting a picture, and that's really kind of what we need to know. And so there were these artists. This is the beginning of Impressionism, because splashing all of this paint around, in a very, what you might call a very frenetic manner. You see, they wanted to paint things, and they wanted to paint them while they were looking at them. And in this case, there's Claude Monet, Impression Sunrise, and here he is. He's trying to get this down before the sun gets too high. The sky lights up and he loses his whole scene. Does that make sense? And he called this Impression Sunrise. And this, as the story goes, this is the basis of the term Impressionism. And the critics of Impressionism, and there were many, they thought this was unschooled, unsophisticated. And in fact, all they were doing was giving you an impression of the subject. In this case, some boats in the harbor and the sunrise, and the sun reflecting off the water, which is, as you can see, just really take your brush. There's a little bit of white in there, a little bit of pink, pinkish orange. Done. And so anyway, they were derided, but that in a lot of ways was okay, because this group of artists were taking up the cause, challenging the art establishment. These were artists of the avant-garde. And so this is what this is all about. They're not really looking for photographic realism. They're giving you what they see. And one of the things that happens, this is Claude Monet as well. One of the things that happens with these painters, this is an earlier one, by the way, is that they like to take the painting outside. And they mostly painted outdoors. This is what's going on here. Monet in his studio boat. He's out there on the water. Bottom line, Manet is out there on the water too, at least up on the bank or something, painting all of this. They love going outdoors. And again, Claude Monet, Impression Sunrise, went outdoors. And there's an earlier Monet, outdoors. And you can see this is one that's probably, if you would look at it in terms of polish and finish, this is actually a little bit more refined, a little more polished. The idea of using the brushwork in this way was something that develops over time from 1868 to 1872. But they like painting outside because that's where they said, and they really kind of build up a whole manifesto of sorts. They didn't write it down. There's no impressionist manifesto, but they had a set of working principles to which they all agreed. And one of them was to work outside. That's where you could see true color. All these other painters that we've seen over the centuries, they painted indoors. Even the Hudson River School, I showed you that, Thomas Cole, the Oxbow, and he set up on this cliff, but he's going to make sketches and he's going to go back to his studio and do paintings from his sketches. And what is the result of painting indoors, especially before we had electric lights? All the paintings look kind of dull, and the colors are more muted, and everything that we've seen here is really pretty toned down. What these impressionists did was go outside and paint outside. It was one of the things that they all agreed upon. And when they brought these paintings back into the galleries and museums, when they brought them indoors, they looked like they lit up. The colors were so bright. It was a real game changer. And so Monet, he's the guy that becomes really the most important and well-known impressionist. And somebody wrote about this. I forgot when I asked you guys about the works you don't really understand. Somebody wrote about this and I forgot who it was, and I didn't bring my list with me. But I'm making sure I'm going to talk about it, because that's what's going on here. 1877, a full 5 years after this. And again, Monet, he's outdoors, but looking at the sunlight only got him so far. Monet starts to experiment with a lot of other atmospheric phenomena. And in this case, it's a train station. And what you have here, and this is the day where we had coal-burning steam locomotives. So what you see here is this train station, and you have in some of this, that dark billowing clouds, that's from a smokestack. That's from the burning coal that heats up the boiler that makes the power for the locomotive to go. But see, here there are other trains at the station. And one of the things that you have to do with steam locomotives is that when you stop, you put out the fire and you release the pressure from the boiler. You ever kind of pay attention to old movies, especially Westerns and stuff, and you see the train pull up to the station and you hear that hissing sound and all of this steam comes out, because if they don't decompress that boiler, the whole thing will blow up. And so that's what they do. They let off. That's actually a term we use now, letting off steam. That's where this comes from. There's a lot of little sayings around it we get from the age of steam locomotives. One of them is, I don't know if you guys hear this anymore, the real McCoy. You ever heard of the real McCoy? That used to be a phrase used a lot. And McCoy was actually a device invented and made by a guy named McCoy. And it was this device that you fill up with oil and it would drip oil onto the axles of the cars being pulled by the locomotives so that the axles didn't get too hot, which kind of brings us up to the present day. We're talking about Ohio, Palestine, Ohio, derailed, didn't have proper brakes and stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like, anyway, bottom line though, railroads and locomotives, steam locomotives, were a big part of life. And it was in France here. And it was in St. Louis. Not quite as much anymore, though we have mostly rail ship goods. But ever see how big Union Station is downtown? And that was like in every city, every major city in the US. And this is the French equivalent of that. And this is where those trains would pull in. But it was about the atmospherics and the light and all of the other things that were going on. And basically, Monet was kind of an artistic scientist. He was really interested in how we perceive light, color, atmosphere, and all of these other things that they're kind of in this area of, things that probably classical artists would not have even gone near. And so Claude Monet, Rouen Cathedral, this is still yet even later. This is how he operated. Rouen Cathedral, a Gothic cathedral in France. And he painted this cathedral over and over and over. That's why we got these little qualifiers here. The portal in the sun. And this is a Gothic cathedral. It was basically made of limestone, which is basically kind of whitish gray. But Monet, being the observer of color, he was finding all of these other colors reflected on the face of this cathedral. And so something that was basically a dull white, gray, he's finding violets, oranges, yellows, blues, all of these colors reflected. And that's what I was meaning about being kind of a scientist like that. And yeah, I got some more examples here. He painted Rouen Cathedral over and over again, and he painted haystacks as well. Again, getting out in the outdoors. And I showed you the gleaners and what happens here. This is the way they made haystacks back in the day. Today, this you wouldn't see anything like this. And if you would see anything, you'd see baled hay if you had a baler. And the farmers in here, anybody farm? No. Well, anyway, you got a machine that would bale hay and it has these kind of rectangular cubes. Toss them in the barn. They have another way of doing that too, and that is that you have these machines and they'll roll it up. You can see those a lot. That's kind of really industrial farming. But back in the day, they had to have the hay to feed the livestock over the winter, and this is how they made their haystacks. And basically put a pile of hay, and then you put this conical shape on top, made out of the hay, but it worked like a thatched roof. It kept the water out of the center of this hay, so it would stay dry and stay good, so you could feed your animals through the winter. So this is haystacks, and he just went out there and started painting them over and over. Oh, I just have two, sorry, I thought I had a third. But anyway, Claude Monet. This is water lilies, and it's huge. 200 by 1276 centimeters. So there's like 2.5 centimeters per inch, roughly. So that would be 80 inches high. Huge. How many of you have been to the St. Louis Art Museum? Yeah, have you guys seen our part of this triptych? Monet water lilies. It's not out all the time. There's 3 of these panels. This one belongs to the Museum of Modern Art. We have one here in St. Louis, and the other one is at the Nelson in Kansas City. And so anyway, if you've ever had the chance to see them, which I might as well bring this up now. Shifting gears. Oh, you guys drive automatics, and you know. Bottom line, I'd like to go with you guys. I'd like to, maybe if you're interested, visit the St. Louis Art Museum. I would like to do that with as many people as we could possibly get together. Admission to the museum is free, but if they have particular exhibits, that's a pay for. But I think what will determine the time and the date is really your availability. And so I'm kind of hoping that it would be something like a Saturday afternoon. And I know you guys have life outside the classroom. You got a lot of you guys have jobs and stuff. I get that's understandable. But a Saturday or Sunday would be like really good. So tonight, I'll put together a kind of a survey, timeline, what days are good for you. And then when we come back, it'll give me some time to let you guys kind of figure this out. And maybe we can, when we come back from break, decide on a time. And that'll be, I really want you guys to go. There's been a lot of artists and a lot of critics and people of my generation talk about this subject or this aspect of teaching art history by books and by slides. that when you actually see the work, it becomes something totally different than what you may have imagined. And so anyway, it's all good to see. They have a pretty good collection, and I'll send that out then. I'm getting a lot of guesses on it. Good. And so anyway, like I said, look, this is 1914 and 1926. So what did we see this? 1874. This is like 50 years. He lives to be pretty old, actually. And he is unlike some of the artists of his era, who was actually recognized in his time. He wasn't an unknown artist. He was actually pretty wealthy by the time he died. Wealthy enough to buy this estate in a town called Giverny. And I want to see if that's on the map here too. Where is it's had to be up here because it was up by the Seine. Anyway, don't see it. Bottom line, he buys this estate at Giverny, big house, and he builds this garden, which is where he painted the water lilies from his lily pond at Giverny. And he also had this. This is a Japanese bridge. That's the title of the painting. That's what it is. He had this constructed on his estate. And I was thinking about this today, actually. I have a picture of one of these on my stairwell going down to the basement. Thinking about it. What this represents in a lot of ways, it represents his interest in Japanese culture. And that's something that's starting to happen too here in France. You'll see a lot of Japanese art influencing these artists. And not only in their construction of a bridge that goes over the water lily pond, but in other ways too. And Calabio, this is another impressionist, brushwork not so loose, but loves painting, A, outdoors, B, atmospherics and stuff like this, the shine of that rain falling. You see it on umbrellas, on the cobblestones, on the street, stuff, going outdoors. Camille Pissarro, another impressionist. I'm going to zoom in because you'll have to see this up close. And he uses kind of broken brushwork, but it's not quite like what you see in Monet and some of them that are just really kind of splashing it around. This is kind of little, it's almost like he attacks the canvas with his brush and paints like this. And it's effective and it's outdoors. And I want to point something out here too. Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Chicago Art Institute, New York Museum of Modern Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art. Oh, this one's still in Paris. Art Institute of Chicago. That one's still in Paris too. And this is in Munich. But look at all of what we've seen so far. And over half of them are not in France. What? Well, I told you they were renegade. I told you they were rebellious. And while they were painting, a lot of these people did not get a lot of public recognition. And a lot of them had trouble selling the paintings. and a sec for Claude Monet, who lived into the 1920s. But at this time in the 1870s, 1860s, 1880s, a lot of these artists were struggling. And guess what? America is booming, not artistically so much, but I showed you the Brooklyn Bridge and was talking about how Andrew Carnegie's steel mills could make enough steel to make all of the cable to make the Brooklyn Bridge. What we had in the US was a handful of people making a whole lot of money. And Carnegie is one, Andrew Carnegie. Actually, this is an aside, but in Cronlet neighborhood of South St. Louis, have St. Louis Public Library. And there's a plaque right next to the door that said, funding for this library was donated by Andrew Carnegie. And what was happening was that a lot of these, they called them robber barons, by the way. People like Vanderbilt, who built the university in Tennessee, Gould, who was a railroad magnate, Rockefeller, who kind of controlled all of the oil. And it was before cars, but they still needed oil for lamps and stuff, you know, anyway. A lot of those Americans, those robber barons, they sent agents over to France. They knew France was like the center, the epicenter of culture, and they sent their people over there. I say agents, they were actually purchasing agents, and they were snapping up a lot of these French impressionists and post-impressionist paintings. They were sending their guys over with a suitcase full of money, and they were sending back. That's why we have about as many impressionist, post-impressionist paintings in the US as they have in France. Because it took the French kind of a while to figure out that, hey, we got something here. But anyway, this one's still at the Museum d'Orsay in Paris. Another impressionist. And as I was saying, they like to go outside, they like to splash paint around. And they were all about light. And look at this. This is like really kind of one of the more famous impressionist paintings ever. Because look what he's doing. See how that light and dark pattern comes in here? Why is that? Because they're trees. And the sunlight is coming through the trees and creating this light, dark pattern. Whoa, pretty amazing. And what we see with Renoir and a few others of his time, they don't go out to the countryside and paint haystacks and stuff like that. They train their focus on the nightlife and the good life in Paris. And so here we go. This is at the Moulin de la Galette, a nightclub. Everybody's dancing, eating. This is a big party. This is kind of a nightclub, but it's not quite night yet. But this is what this is. This is the good life. And they had been, some critics kind of frowned upon this because bottom line is that you're not supposed to, this is not serious, if you will. It's all this dancing and stuff. There's another Manet, same guy, and he's still painting, and he's kind of following the trends here. This is an indoor painting, to be sure, but he's like his colleagues. He's splashing that paint around in an impressionistic way, and he's very interested in light and color. And it's about that nightlife. I want to jump ahead here a little bit. There's another guy. This is called post-impressionism, but see, this is in the 90s. Somebody else wrote about this painting too. And what happens is that the Impressionists kind of opened the door to a lot of other possibilities. And so still Toulouse-Lautrec, he's still interested in all of this good life, the scene, the entertainment scene, the club scene of Paris. But they start opening up some other issues here. And one of these has to do with composition. This is not a traditional composition. In fact, you got this whole edge of the bar table right here that cuts off all, like almost a whole quarter of this painting. It's got this strong diagonal. The other thing that's going on here is he's thinking about color, just like his colleagues in Impressionism. Color is like really what they're into. But her face is green. And more or less what's happening is that she has this white makeup on, and there is some kind of light source that's over here off of the picture, and it's shining up, and it's almost as though, you guys ever do this when you were kids? Put a flashlight under your face, get scary, tell story. Well, that's pretty much what's happening here. And because she has this white makeup on, he's seeing this shadow area as green. But I digress. That whole idea of post-impressionism, it doesn't really change on a dime. It's something that starts to happen once all of the Monets and the Pissarros and Manet folks have all kind of explored what they're doing. This guy here, Edgar Degas, he does another kind of thing too. This is another composition that shouldn't be, according to the rules that they would teach you at the academy. Where is the central point here? There. Well, that's a total rejection of all of this stuff that they'd been talking about for 400 years. The vanishing point, right in the center. It's like all of the orthogonals come in and they converge at this central point. Not so. And in fact, this is kind of a strong diagonal this way, and it's almost like two different paintings. You see that? Well, what in the heck was Degas thinking? Well, he, like his Impressionist colleagues, really interested in light and color and all of that, and they use color much more vigorously than their contemporaries on the neoclassical side. Degas, he's influenced by photography. Can you tell? How so? One of the things that Degas liked about photography, and he thought was so interesting, and especially when you have all of these artists trying to challenge all of the rules of color, of composition, of subject matter, everything. He liked photography in that the photographs basically create an image based on where you point the camera. And it doesn't have all of these built-in rules about centering the composition. It doesn't have any rules about balance. You guys know this. You guys have smartphones. Of course, you can compose a lot better with smartphones because you can see what you're going to take. In this day and age, mostly it was there was a lot of guesswork involved. But bottom line, the camera will, if you point it in this way and you click the shutter, you'll cut this figure right in half. And you'll get compositions where things are cut off. Back in the day when you never knew what you had until you had the film developed. I've been going through family photos. My mom, bless her soul, she could not use a camera. I see all these pictures of people from the neck down and stuff. You know, it's like that's what a camera does. And that's what interested ADAH. He said, you know, I'll approach it just like a camera. I'll put in there what I see and how I see it, regardless if it comes out to be a good composition, whether the orthogonals all meet up at a particular point. He loved that. And you'll find a lot of his work is kind of like that subjects are cut off. And in this case, it's kind of an interesting thing because there is some balance here, but it's this side versus this side with a big basic diagonal line separating the weight on this side and on that side. And that's pretty much what I was talking about with this. These guys, these artists are starting to challenge the rules. And so here's another ADAH. And one of the things about ADAH is like he hung around the ballet studios and he painted a lot of women. Women seemed to be his most favorite subject, but notably, since all of these artists were interested in color, he brings back this. It's been around for a few hundred years, but he kind of puts this to use, pastel. And for those of you who don't make art, haven't had a drawing class, it's basically chalk, colored chalk, if you will. And you can do a lot of things with it, and especially if you have paper that has a texture, and we call that the tooth of the paper. And you can see some of that actually in here. But you can make these kind of marks when you drag that pastel stick over the top. And so you can lay that white over the top and create the highlights and stuff. But again, another composition, or he's got the table in here. She's not quite centered. In fact, it's kind of, in Academy standards, this would be like not a very good composition. And so, I told you that Claude Monet had that place built with the Japanese bridge, and Japanese artists were really starting to influence French artists. Well, I want to give you a little explanation about that. As we know, these impressionists, starting with people like Courbet and Manet and these guys, they're all challenging all of the standard rules of making art. And they're drawing their influences from all over the place. I just showed you how photography kind of entered into that in terms of ADAH, Toulouse-Lautrec and their compositions. What these artists started to be influenced by was this. Tori Kiyanaga. Two women at the bath. And this is a detail, so. But look at how this is put together. This is a woodblock print. And what you have here is like areas of flat color. And in this case, probably at one time was flat color, but over time it's kind of deteriorated. But they kind of liked how this was put together. And they saw that you could make bamboo with a flat color, some outline, and some dots. And you could kind of reduce the elements, line, shape, color, and still come out with an understandable and believable image. And in this case, this is really kind of a flat image, but they kind of really liked how some of this was put together. And especially we talk about this woman's arm, described by nothing except the outline. You may take that for granted in this day and age because we see a lot of art made like that. But back then it was like, whoa, look at this. This is genius. You don't have to do modeling. You don't have to worry about the light source. You don't have to do all of this stuff with color. You can simplify things. And they thought, and as they rightfully thought, this was really revolutionary. Which gets me to another point. How did these French artists get all of this Japanese art? This is why this is Art and Ideas, and it's called art history. Because there's a historical side to this. And that is that until the mid-19th century, Japan was a closed society. Have you guys ever read about the shoguns? And it was isolated. It did not interact with the rest of the world. Japan was basically self-contained, and their culture grew according to their way of seeing the world, their ethics, their values, their religion, their government, the emperor, and all of this stuff, Shinto Buddhism. But nobody, it was like a hermit country until the 1850s. There was this U.S. naval, Commodore Perry, naval officer. He floated his warship into Tokyo Bay. And what he had with him astounded the Japanese. He had a miniature steam locomotive, and he had his men set up some tracks, and they put some coal inside of it, and they watched this little train go around in a circle. And they had other things from the Western world that looked new, almost looked like aliens came in and showed them all of this technology that was developed in the West. And the Japanese realized that, or decided that they should join the rest of the world. This whole business of being a hermit kingdom,
was not going to work. That what they needed to do was modernize and get with the 19th century. Period. And in order to do that, they had to establish trade. Because in Japan, there's a lot of materials necessary for being an industrialized country. Period. They didn't have the resource. So they had to start trading. And one of the things that Japan had in abundance was a lot of artwork, especially things like this. It's a wood block print. And they could sell these Europeans in trade for their technology, whatever, or their raw materials, whatever it might be. And in fact, Japan industrialized so quickly, like within about 50 or 60 years, they went to war with Russia. And they beat Russia. But by then they had steel battleships and cannons and everything. And if you want to move that ahead another 40 years after that, that was part of World War II. Japan sought to be a major industrial power, but they didn't have the resources to pull this off entirely. So that's why they wanted to colonize most of East Asia. But I have to get into the politics of it. But bottom line, these prints from Japanese artists started to flood the market in places like Paris. And these artists, they knew what they were looking at. And they were of a mind that they would break these rules. They would challenge all of the rules of Western art. And so you get this guy, Toulouse-Lautrec, as I showed you his other at the Moulin Rouge. He starts making art that's really quite a bit like that print I showed you. And her legs are just flat shapes, and her arm is flat shaped. The dress, 1, 2 lines, flat. Lithograph, so it's print. I start really looking at these artists and trying to emulate what they were doing. And before I go, there was somebody that wrote about this as a painting that that was kind of confusing or baffling. And this is James Abbott McNeill Whistler, an Englishman, and he was kind of joining in on some of the trends, some of the developments in Paris too. And you can see, look at this brushwork. It's kind of like impressionistic. In fact, impressionists so much are connected to this kind of brushwork that we actually use the term impressionistic brushwork. But really what this painting is about, it says rocket falling, but fireworks. Basically what this is, it's a painting of fireworks. And in that sense, it kind of connects with all of the atmospheric stuff, all of the color stuff, all of the agitated brushwork that I was talking about with Monet and the train station and stuff like that. So when we come back, I know that today's the International Day of the Woman. I told you I'd let you go early. I thought I'd be here. One of the things that happens, Mary Cassatt, an American artist, she goes to France. As I was saying, they were the epicenter of culture. And Cassatt was somebody that really was an artist, and she wasn't getting the opportunities that her male counterparts had. And her family had some money. And so she went over to France and studied with the Impressionists. And then there's another woman associated with the Impressionists, and you can see with Berthe Morisot, really much more impressionistic. But one of the things, we'll talk about these paintings a little more after a break, but one of the things that was really so cool about the Impressionists was that they were challenging all of the norms, and even the norm that making art was a man's job. They readily accepted women, and they flourished, and more so, and Cassatt, they're right up there with Monet and Degas. And one of the things that comes through about, in large part, with Mary Cassatt, and more so, is that they often paint from a woman's point of view. So we don't see these women as objects of desire. We see women as mothers and nurturers. You see women as friends and as independent. And here's another mother and child in a villa at the seaside. Berthe Morisot, Mary Cassatt, and you know, I gotta let you guys go early. Hey, I like you guys. Second, I have to run back home and get my 2 grandchildren because there's family night at the Magic House and Papa is gonna take them. And so I want to be there on time. And so you guys have a good break. There are still a few papers that haven't been turned in. And the site will stay open through Friday night, so finish them up if you haven't yet. Send me questions. A number of you have had questions, and I'm happy to help you out as much as I can. And so, okay, yes. Happy Holo. And don't forget, Friday afternoon. That's all I got. Be good, be safe, have a lot of fun. You go down to Florida or something. Watch out for the motorcycles. It's bike week in Daytona. That's where my brother lives. He's a biker.
I had a question for, are you allowed to use websites that weren't on the Marigold website that are reliable for our 5 pages?
Yes,
Okay.
as a matter of fact, that's what I just want you to have. See you later, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want you to be able
Have
to
a good holiday.
those peer reviewed sources, but that is not the only thing
Okay.
that you need to have in there. And that's a very good question. And bottom line is that you almost
Happy Holi.
Happy Holy, yes. That I had one person that really was having trouble. It got a kind of an obscure painting, by the way, and I redirected him to the Prado, which is basically the National Museum in Spain, and got on their website, which is where this painting is, and was able to help them out. And that's a reliable website, you know, all of these museums and stuff.
Because I used one of the videos that you put on in class, the smart history ones, because I have like a bunch of information on it.
Those are good, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. And there's another thing too, not so much with this class, but in art history 1, And I'm starting to try to push this a little more too. National Geographic,
Mm-hmm.
they have stuff almost every week about the ancient world because they're just discovering more and more. And that's reliable. That's out of the Smithsonian, you know, so
I think I also use the Smithsonian for some nice stuff.
good.
But thank
That's-
you.
That's the gold standard. Def Leppard,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Hey, did you see the Guns N' Roses coming back to St. Louis?
I saw that.
I got tickets.
You did.
Yeah.
They're going, I was amazed. They're gonna be at Busch Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're so expensive. I
Oh.
could barely find some that weren't like $200 already.
Oh,
And that's for
boy.
like up top.
Yeah, I kinda thought that.
It's bad. But have a good spring break.
Yeah, you too, guys, be careful.